Let's talk about something quick. I've noticed a trend and I want us to address it. And this is all about the conceptual framework. I've seen a lot of mistakes here and there. I'm reviewing some papers and student theses and I realize there's a lot of issues with this. And this is not supposed to be an issue in the first place. So if you haven't watched my video on conceptual framework, please scroll through the videos to see it to understand better. But a conceptual framework basically is a map or a researcher constructed framework, which is a representation of the relationship you expect to see between your variables, or the characteristics or properties that you want your variables to show. So a conceptual framework is a researcher constructed, which means you, the researcher, you're the one going to do it, or a visual map that outlines the key variables, concepts, and relationships expected in your study. And there are key components to a conceptual framework. It includes the independent variables, the dependent variables, and the mediating or moderating variables depending on what you are looking at. And we know that the independent variables are the factors or inputs that you manipulate or expect to influence the outcome. And then the dependent variable is the primary outcome or effects you want to measure and explain. And when we talk about the mediating or moderating variables, these are just factors that explain the process between the independent and dependent variables, or they also affect the strength of their relationship. So what is the issue? I'm noticing that some students are just copying and pasting random images or charts into their conceptual framework section. And most of the time, these do not in any way relate to their objectives or study goals. I mean, if you are really tired of research issues and comments from a supervisor, why don't you do it the right way and be free? So I'm going to show you, I think I have a few student theses here that we can look at just to go through just briefly. This is not going to take much time. Okay, so look at this person's conceptual framework here. See the conceptual framework here. We have background characteristics, health system factors, then we have individual factors. To me, this is a pretty straightforward conceptual framework. And also make sure that your conceptual framework is easy to understand. Don't go and do something complicated that when someone sees it at first glance, he or she doesn't know what you're talking about. So in this diagram, even without knowing the person's topic or reading the person's narrative to the conceptual framework, I can see that he or she is saying that background characteristics affect the level of awareness or knowledge of participants. The same applies to the health system factors. Same applies to individual factors. So this is a conceptual framework showing how other factors affect the level of awareness and knowledge. And again, this conceptual framework should relate to your objectives or topic for that matter. So let's look at this person's topic and see if it actually relates. So yeah, you can see that this person's topic is awareness and knowledge of polycystic ovarian syndrome among nurses at the Tema metropolis in the Greater Accra region of Ghana. So awareness and knowledge, right, of a particular disease or syndrome. Then let's look at the objectives and see what they are saying. Okay, so the objectives are saying that to determine the level of awareness, fine. To assess nurses' knowledge, so which means these are our main outcomes that we are looking at. Then to identify the sources of information, those are secondary objectives. Then to determine factors associated with the awareness and knowledge levels of PCOS, of PCOS, right? So when you take that back to the conceptual framework, you can realize that this all makes sense because they are looking at awareness and knowledge levels, and they are looking at what factors affect these outcome that they are looking at. So realize that they have background characteristics, we have health system factors and individual factors. So this is one key example of how to present your conceptual framework. And again, there are some conceptual frameworks which are based on models or existing theories. So if there are theories in your field that have already been done, then you just have to go and use those theories or model diagrams and then adapt it to yours. I don't know if I have any example here, but let's see. Okay, so here is a conceptual framework of another student, and this student is using the model Karasek's 1979 job demand control model. So it's the model that he is using to study this particular topic. So instead of just going to do something entirely different, he chose this model which is already existing, which aligns with his objective, and he just adapted it to fit his topic. So let's go and look at the topic to realize that we have, first of all, let's look at the model again. We have independent variables affecting workplace stress, affecting mental health outcomes, and this one is also affecting coping strategies. So this alone should tell you that the person is dealing with something around mental health and workplace. So let's see if that matches the topic. Yes, so you can see that the topic is assessing the impact of workplace stress on mental health among health workers, a case study of the 37 military hospital in Accra, Ghana. And then let's look at the objectives as well. Let's look at the objectives and see what is there. So we have determined the prevalence of stress issues, prevalence of depression, prevalence of anxiety, to investigate the coping mechanisms. So we have coping mechanisms, then mental health, which all these issues, including stress, depression, anxiety, fall under. Then we go back to the conceptual framework to see exactly that. So realize that we have workplace stress, which is covered here. Then we have mental health outcomes as stated in the objectives, which includes depression, anxiety, and stress. And then we have the coping strategies as well. So this is telling us a story. Someone should be able to look at your conceptual framework and follow through and know what you're trying to discuss. So we are seeing here the independent variables, which includes job demands, job control, demographics, workplace context. So we are seeing that all these puts stress on the participants. So we are saying that all these things lead to workplace stress, which is job strain. And under this thing, we also have high psychological strain. And again, workplace stress also causes mental health outcomes, including depression, anxiety, and stress. So when someone is under stress, the person is able to come up with coping strategies, which is either good or bad, which is either adaptive or maladaptive. So you see that I'm able to explain this in my own way without even reading the student's narrative to explain the conceptual framework. And again, when you paste in a conceptual framework, you also have to put in a text to give context to what you're trying to say. So you're going to explain how you are applying this conceptual framework to the study. So you can see that we have a narrative here. So this student is saying, as a theoretical framework, the study will rely on Karasek's 1979 job demand control model. So you talk about the model or the framework you're using and explain how the variables in your study are going to be explained or discussed using this particular conceptual framework. And most of the time, and I think this is always the standard, all these constructs or variables in your conceptual framework are supposed to be measured by your questionnaire if it is a quantitative study. So basically all the things that are in your questionnaire, majority of them or the major aspects should be illustrated by the conceptual framework so that I can know that this is what you are going to measure, and at the end of the day you have a good mark coming in. And once you do that, you can defend yourself anytime because you're able to explain your result or the data collected from the field in the context of the conceptual framework that you've brought. I think that covers it. So that is all I want to babble about, and I hope you understand this and don't make this mistake when it comes to wrapping up your work, or if you are going to start your work. I hope you take this into consideration and do it properly. All the best. I'll see you in the next one.